Welcome everybody to another episode of IGN Unfiltered. It's the monthly interview show where I very much enjoy sitting down with the best, brightest, most interesting minds in the games industry. And I am so pleased to be joined by someone who I haven't seen in a couple of years.
No?
Peter Molyneux, legendary game designer. Your resume, which we're going to get well into, is or CV, I suppose I should say.
I've just got one thing to say on that. I think the dictionary definition of the word legendary means that the person has to be dead.
Okay.
So, I mean,
renowned?
I could be on life support here or something, but renowned would do.
All right, well, Peter Molyneux, you know him from games like Populous, Theme Park, Dungeon Keeper, Black and White, the Fable series, on forward to what you're doing now at 22 Cans. And so, if you look at those games, Peter, here's where I want to start with you. There's a common theme to a lot of those games, and that's many of them are God games, and that's really how you made your name.
Yes.
What is it about you psychologically that you think has drawn you to making games where you're God?
Well, what the actual honest answer is that I love. Well, I'll actually tell you the real answer.
Please.
And the real answer is that when I was a kid, I don't think I've ever told this story. I read this short story, and I think it was by Ray Bradbury, and it was this short story of this family that had this little house with these little characters in them. They cared for these little characters, and in the end, the little characters turned on the family and killed them horribly. You know, it's like a 1950s sci-fi story. They never end well.
Yeah.
And I have always remembered the feeling of what it would have been like to have this little world that you controlled and allowing you to be kind of kind and cruel, allowing you to be nurturing and nice as well as nasty and horrible. I find that a fascinating thing. For me, it's having control over something and allowing people to kind of experiment with people. I guess it says to me that I'm a controlling personality.
I was gonna, are you a control freak in your real life, in your day-to-day life?
I think we'd have to ask the team about that, and I think probably they would say absolutely he's a control freak. Yes.
Well, were you big into video games as a kid, or did that part of it come along later for you?
Well, if video games had been around, I would have been absolutely.
Well, certainly you're not that old.
No, I am. I am. I can remember absolutely clearly. I can remember what the weather was like the day I first saw a Pong machine, and it was in our local electronics store. And I walked past it, and my jaw fell, and I thought I've got to have one of those. And so I went back home, and I must have been about 16, 17 at the time. I went back home. I didn't have any money at all. My grandmother was staying. I went and stole the money from my grandmother's purse. I came back. I bought this Pong machine. I got home, closed my bedroom door, started playing with myself on the Pong machine.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, this is incredibly boring. So I took the machine apart and it never worked again. That was my first exposure to computer games.
Interesting. So
it entirely changed my life.
So it was love at first sight until you actually played the game.
Until I played it, and straight away I thought there's got to be more. You know, there's got to be, and you know, Pong. It's just the bat going.
Yeah.
There's just got to be more. And so that was my first real exposure to a game that you could own. Of course, there were arcade games, but not a game you own. And then after that, there was a whole series of home computers and stuff.
So if you were a teenager at this point, does that, you mentioned that everything changed at that point.
Yeah.
Did you suddenly think, I want to be a game designer and do this better than Pong?
Well, I mean, the other thing was that what it absolutely did to me is that it is such an interesting story, and it would take so long to say and tell. But up to that point, literally up to that point, I was pretty rubbish at everything I had done in my life. I was the worst student at school. I was the bottom of every single table.
So what were you interested then, if not
nothing,
schoolwork?
Nothing. And then it
hooligan.
was virtually a hooligan. It was a moment I saw, and my analogy is I saw that Pong machine and it changed everything in me. And because I saw it, I decided, right, I need to learn about computers. I need to be able to learn to program.
Yeah.
So I then applied myself, and I then went and got the qualifications. I could go to university, and then I went to university. I did computer science, and all because I'd seen that one machine. Yeah.
So did your grandmother forgive you in time?
She never knew.
Never knew.
She never knew.
Never knew.
To this day.
What did your parents? I mean, were your parents compassionate or strict? Were they, if you're a poor student, are they frustrated with you? And then do they recognize this Pong and these computers as sort of as this catalyzing force for you, or do they brush it off as, oh no, that's just a distraction, Peter, you shouldn't spend your time with that?
I mean, if you ask my mother now, she would say, oh, I was always proud of you, and I knew you were going to do great things. But they really wanted me to be an accountant. I absolutely wanted me to be an accountant. My mother...
Was that the family business?
It wasn't a family business. I don't know why they wanted me to be an accountant. I mean, I was probably the worst personality of accountant. I can remember that they interviewed me. There was an interview for a school which specialised in accountants, training young accountants. Unusually, my mother came along to the interview. Normally, that mothers aren't supposed to come along to the interview. And I'm kind of sitting there, and I was a very shy child, and my mother said, "Yes, I know Peter's going to be good at going to be a great accountant because he always wins at Monopoly." Well, I never got offered a place in that accounting school, and thank God I didn't. But but no, up to the point I saw that machine, I was just rubbish at absolutely everything.
Well, what did you want to be? I mean, I know if you said you sort of weren't interested in anything. What was the original vision for what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah, if there had been computer games about, I would have wanted to be involved in that. Yeah. And when I saw it, and then I wanted to be involved in it. Up until that point, I wanted to run my own business. Absolutely. And I don't know why I imagined that. My first business was when I was 12 years old, where I rented out my sister and her friends to do other people's gardening. And I used to, these 8-year-old girls used to go off and do other people's gardens. I used to collect the money. I mean, they were slightly immoral, I suppose. But there was much more innocent days then.
Yes.
And then my next business was when I was at school, because I went to boarding school. I realised that if you lent money to unpopular children, then you got the money back. So I used to lend money at exorbitant interest rates. So I always had these little business...
Little schemes.
Yeah, little schemes.
You're a schemer.
Yeah. I was a schemer. Not a nice child. You wouldn't want to invite me home to, you wouldn't want to I wasn't invited to many play dates, let's put it that way.
So is it a coincidence then that after your mother tries to do everything in her power to get you into finance and accounting, that your first game, when you finally took a shot at it, was called The Entrepreneur, and it was a business sim, effectively, yes.
It was a business simulator on a home computer called the BBC Micro. And I don't know if the BBC Micro ever was released over here.
Doesn't ring a bell for me.
It was kind of like a Commodore 64 type of thing. Yeah. And I had this tiny little business called Vulcan Computing. And Vulcan Computing,
Star Trek reference, or
no? It was Vulcan, the god of war.
Okay.
I think it was. Yeah, it was just I was in this tiny little this office made of cardboard boxes. The whole office made of cardboard boxes, and in the corner of this warehouse. And what the business did, my business idea was to sell floppy disks. These are 5.25-inch
Yep.
floppy disks to schools. And my USP for doing that is that the floppy disks would have free software on it. And some of the free software was what I realized that people actually just wanted the software, they didn't want the disks. Anyway, as part of the business, what I also decided to do, I was like, right, I'm going to make a game. And in those days, Ryan, literally all you had to do is move a few coloured pixels across the screen and allow the player to shoot it, and you'd have a success. It was so easy to...
And you could do it by yourself. You didn't need a team.
Oh, absolutely. You didn't need a team. You could do it by yourself. So what did I decide to do? I decided to do... It was effectively a business game, God game.
Yeah.
Really, it was. And I was so convinced this game was to be a success. There was no publishers in those days. I published it myself, took an advert out in a magazine. And I phoned up a local post office. And I said, look, I'm just releasing this game. It's going to be a mega hit. You might want to put on more postmen. I had a post box in the front. Very confident, yeah. I had a post box in the front of the office, and I thought, I went in there. It's just not big enough. They're just not going to get that. So in those days, you had to write in with a check. There wasn't any PayPal or anything like that. You wrote in with a check in an envelope, and I thought, this post. So I cut this massive hole in the bottom of the door so that the post could come in. Anyway, to cut a long story short,
no one
bought it. 2 copies were sold, both of which I suspect my mother bought. And, that could have been the end of my career in the computer games industry.
Well, because after that, if I have my history correct, you started a business called Taurus Impex Limited, which, please explain this to me, a company that exported baked beans to the Middle East.
To the Middle East, yeah.
With a business partner named Les Edgar.
Yeah.
What?
Right.
Please explain this.
The whole story was, and I'll try and make it as short as possible. I had this girl I really fancied, really called Camille. Her name was Camille de Kock, and I wasn't a good-looking bloke. And she had her father kind of took a shine to me, and he said, I tell you what you're going to do. I'm going to give you the contacts so you can start up an import-export business.
Yeah.
And he gave us 2 contacts. One was this company, which is crazy really, company in Switzerland that needed us to get money systems for them. This sounds very strange. In slot machines, the mechanism that we shipped them out to them, and they ordered about 2 of those a month, and we made about $10 on each one. And the other one was this company in the Middle East, which acted as a distributor for baked beans. Sadly, baked beans aren't that popular in the Middle East. Can't understand why. Maybe it could be the result. If they were more popular in the Middle East, we may not have the problems over there. But we used to ship out these horribly cheap baked beans to the Middle East, and we made about 1/4 cent per crate of baked beans when we shipped out. Anyway, this was going on, and the business was just about paying for enough for me to eat.
Yeah, not beans, I suspect.
No. In fact, I ended up eating a lot of the bean stock. When one day a company called Commodore phoned us up. And they said, look, we make a home computer called the Commodore Amiga, and we would love to show you our product. It's going to be coming out really soon. We'd love to show you our product. And they invited us in. They had sent a chauffeur-driven car to pick us up. Now, bear in mind, all we were famous for was shipping out baked beans.
Yeah, and you're still, what are you, 18, 19, 20
No,
at this point?
At this point, I must be 20, early 20, 20-something, 23, 24.
Yeah.
They took us out, they showed us around their factory, showed us the Amiga. They said, we would love, love, love for you to put your product onto our machine.
So they give you a bunch of free computers.
They gave us a bunch of free computers, and that's when I realized that we were called Taurus Impex. There was another company called Taurus, spelt T-O-R-U-S, like the thing, and they made networks. We just shipped out baked beans, but I lied.
So, a straight up mistaken identity. They just
Total
didn't realize they're
mistake of
talking to the wrong
identity.
Taurus.
We had the Amiga number 6, the 6th Amiga, all signed by the people, and from there that gave me the computers, so that I was able to start fiddling around with these computers and messing around with them, which kind of led to Populous.
And that's some, yeah. So
I'm getting a lot of crazy things out in the middle.
Yeah,
of that,
so that somehow leads to you start Bullfrog because you decide I better do something with these computers and maybe make a game,
That's right.
games.
Yeah, we had these computers. The baked bean business was rubbish. The money systems weren't being awarded anymore, and that's when I thought, right, let's start, and I'll do a game.
Yeah.
I'll write a game, and you couldn't. It wasn't a really snappy name, Taurus Impex. So, thought of Bullfrog.
Sounds important.
Yeah, it sounds important, doesn't it? It wasn't. And started working on a game. The first thing that we did...
you're quoted as saying that you bullshitted your way through Bullfrog's first game, which was a translation of a game called Druid 2 Enlightenment. How do you bullshit your way through your first
I'll tell you how, Ryan. It was with I had a friend called Andrew Bailey, and he said, oh, I've got some friends who've done this game called Druid 2 Enlightenment on the Commodore 64. And they're called the Carter Brothers. And I
file that name away for later.
File that name for later. I never met them. And he said, Firebird would give you £4,000. That was, I was so poor in those days. I was disgustingly poor. I won't even begin to tell you where I showered. But that's for another time. So I had a meeting with these people. Now, bear in mind, I hadn't done any games programming before, and I can remember this meeting. This guy called Tony Beckworth, who's still in the industry today, still hasn't forgiven me, even today. And so Tony said, "Right, Peter, what frame rate can you do the game in?" Oh, shit, what's a frame rate? So I said, 5 or 6? And he said, well, only 5 or 6? Well, I mean, 5 or 6 to start with, but then going up to 10 or 15. He said, oh, we know it's got to be 30. Well, I'll double that, almost. It was complete and utter bullshit. And then I got this game. It was done programmed by Simon and Dean Carter and this guy Andrew Bailey, and they'd done a pretty good job of it. I actually, from the way they laid out the code, I learned an awful lot from doing that and did the conversion.
So not unlike Pong, you effectively learned by deconstructing Druid 2 and reassembling it on the Amiga.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Already your career is a series of insane breaks and coincidences.
Totally.
It's unbelievable, and we're just getting started. So after that, that clearly goes well enough.
Yeah.
And
4,000 was enough money to keep me in baked potatoes, and I was working my way through those tins of baked beans, and to enable me to not have to live so hand to mouth, and that enabled me to think about other games.
Like Populous. You come up with the concept for Populous, which is a Hall of Fame caliber game. It's sold 4 million copies.
Yeah.
At what point with Populous, obviously you must have thought it was a good idea as you went through with it, and then it sells 4 million copies. When do you know it's a huge hit?
Well, I didn't have a clue. No, taking you back to those days, here's someone who really hadn't worked with anybody who'd done a game before. I, converted a game, but I didn't know the right and wrong way of doing it. And the story behind Populous is I walked in one day and I was sitting next to someone called Glenn Corpus, who was this graphic artist. He was employed to do the graphics on Druid 2. And he was messing around with these isometric blocks on screen. Yeah. And I said to him, oh, give me those blocks, and I'd just mess around with them. And I started messing around with these blocks, and I thought, and that's where the story of the little yes. characters come in. I thought, these blocks, they're kind of like an island. Mm-hmm. And so I made this island shape and Glenn drew the blue water. And I had these little characters on there. And then I thought, God, it'd be great if they, all ran around. But I just couldn't, I wasn't a smart enough coder to do the route finding of these little characters, so they go from A to B. And so I started, writing the code so you could raise the land up and push the land down. And that mechanic was born really out of my incompetence as a coder. And then the next thing that happened is that Glenn and I got an RS-232 cable. You probably don't even know what that is, do you? An RS-232 cable?
Maybe at some point, somewhere in my head it might exist.
So basically it's a serial cable that allowed you to communicate, allowed you to attach
the COM ports.
The COM ports, yeah.
Okay, yes.
Normally they were made for attaching the modem to the thing. And there was a big ribbon cable.
Yeah, is that the 9-pin? Or is that...
It was a 16-pin.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was 16. We swapped 2 pins and plugged the 2 of these medias together.
Okay.
And we started playing Populous multiplayer. And that really was the birth of Populous.
Yeah.
Because every day we would play it, and I'd had a simple rule: if Glenn beat me, there was something wrong with the game. It was that simple in my mind. And we carried on playing, and really no one saw it. We didn't have a publisher. We eventually took it, me and Les took it round to quite a few publishers, and no publisher was really interested in it at all because, there wasn't any shooting, and it was just too weird for them. And eventually we went to Electronic Arts, and Mark Lewis and David Gardner were just setting up the European office. They were just setting up the European office, and they said, okay, we'll publish it because we've got a hole in our portfolio.
Yeah, you need some content.
Yeah, we need some content. So I delivered the game. I'd never dealt with a publisher before, and the game came out, and this journalist called Bob Wade, I still know him to this day, and he was a journalist on a magazine called Ace, which I don't think ever was sold over there, came into the studio. Now, when I say a studio, it was a room that was about the size of this, and it just smelled horrible. There was several life forms which used to be pizzas in the corner, and there was piles of, and of course those days you couldn't be a coder without smoking 60 cigarettes a day. It was absolutely
in England.
So I had this mountainous ashtray with it piled with these cigarette ends. It stunk to high heaven. And then Bob Wade came in, and I thought, oh God, I'd never met a journalist before. I thought, what am I going to do with this guy? He terrified me. I knew he was a famous journalist. So I know. Golden rule: take him down the pub, get him drunk. Took him down the pub. We got absolutely slaughtered. Had like 15 pints each, and the whole time, all I really wanted to ask is, "What did you think of the game?"
Yeah.
And he said, so eventually, we were virtually falling on the floor.
You get it out of him finally.
Yeah, Bob, what did you think of the game? And he said, "It's the greatest game I've ever played."
Wow.
And the first thought that came into my mind is, he must never play the game ever again. Because he must have made a mistake. And really that was my first inkling that this weird, crazy game was going to be successful.
Please tell me that, since you worked with EA, that they, and you never worked with a publisher, please tell me they didn't rake you over the coals and you actually made some money on Populous.
Well, the other funny story is that they phoned me up after it had shipped out and said, "Congratulations, you're a millionaire." Because Populous accounted for, I think it was a third of the entire revenue of Electronic Arts.
Wow.
For almost 2 years.
That's I think pre-Madden and
it was
earlier days
pre-Madden,
of
but
Electronic
it
Arts.
was millions and millions and millions.
Wow.
What they omitted to say to me, it would be a further 9 months before I saw a single penny, and the contract was so awful. It would, I think I got less than 7% of the retail price. It would, to me, it was a fortune at the time. But it did allow me to, it kind of gave me the confidence to start, experimenting with, other games, yeah.
And is, at that point, are your parents just over the moon that their son has turned from a bullshit artist into a successful game developer?
Well, you've got to remember that for a start, I was, because it took so long to get the actual money, and my parents didn't have any money to lend me anything.
Yeah.
And I was just this slightly, bizarre person in computer games. What the hell are you doing? Get back to accountancy college, So it wasn't until, I don't think really they really realized I was, there was something tangible there until the time when Bullfrog was sold. I think.
And that's so eventually EA does come to you and purchase Bullfrog.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the point where you finally it's a life-changing situation because you've sold, you're able to sell the studio at that point?
It's completely life-changing.
Yeah.
It up until that point, I'd done Populous, I'd done Powermonger, I think we'd done Syndicate, but really I hadn't really made any real money because we just
put it all back in.
Put it all back in,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until then Electronic Arts purchased Bullfrog, and it was a kind of cash day one deal.
Wow.
And it was I would say that was one of the most distressing periods of my life.
Distressing, not wonderful. It was distressing.
It was It was awful. It was awful.
Really?
It was terrible. It was terrible.
Why?
I think anyone who wins the lottery will say exactly the same.
I mean, there have certainly been stories about how it can be.
Because
People coming out of the woodwork on you?
What happened was, in everybody else, up until that point, I was just this cigarette-smoking, slightly eccentric bloke that would just work all the time.
Yeah.
And then after that point, I was a successful businessman with millions and millions of pounds. And all my relationships with people that I worked with overnight completely changed.
Wow.
I got this
For the worse, it sounds like.
There is something really strange, and it's a very interesting thing to explore. There's something really strange that happens to you when you go from being in a place where you can afford nothing, where my mail by my front door was that high because I daren't open any letter because I knew they were all final demands. I was going to be the bailiffs.
Eating baked beans.
Yeah, I was eating baked beans. The bailiffs were coming in all the time. You go from that to having enough money that you can afford anything. Anything. And I can remember walking down a local high street and thinking, I can afford anything. In fact,
what'd you buy?
There's a really funny story. So, me and Les, we just signed this deal, and we got back to England, and we're walking along this famous road in London called King's Road. Some fabulous shops there, and there's a section of King's Road which has got lots of antique shops in. And I say to Les, let's go in and buy something crazy. So I walk into the store, and the people in London in this particular street are really quite horrible people. They don't like just. I've never been much of a dresser, and I certainly don't look.
You're the riffraff.
I'm the riffraff, and so yes. What do you want? And so I walked in, and they had this beautiful table, this partner's table, and I said, I'll take that one. I'll take one of those, please. Yeah. And she said, I'm afraid you can't afford that.
Wow.
And I said, I beg your pardon, I very much think I can afford that. How much is it? £3.5 million. So I had to walk out of the shop thinking, so, even three, they was, yes, I mean, geez, I think she inflated the price a little bit. But
I should hope so.
It just goes to show, no matter how much money you've got, there's always something which you can't actually afford.
Did you buy anything though? Did you end up treating yourself?
I bought a house, which was crazy. I bought this really big house, and everything I owned fitted into the hall.
Yeah.
And it was a big house. And I bought this house, and I can remember, I had people over and everything like that. But there was one. I'd been there for about a week, and I was sitting in this house. And I thought, what the hell have I got this house for? I think I haven't even got the furniture to fill it. I brought a fantastic car and everything like that.
So all right, let's get back to games, because I want to ask you about Theme Park, because I feel like Theme Park is, I think it's the most underrated game in your portfolio.
Yeah,
do you agree with that? What do you think?
Well, it was the most successful game.
Yeah.
Funny enough.
But I feel like nobody ever talk. Like we don't talk about it now.
No,
that's what I mean.
It's because I ruined it. I made this huge mistake in America, just in America. And what I did is that I think it was one of the big retailers. It may have been GameStop, maybe I don't know which one it was. They came to me and said, "Oh, we've heard you're doing Theme Park. We've got this opportunity. We're going to do this disc, which we'll give out to every single customer that comes in the store. If you put a demo of Theme Park on there, it'd be fantastic."
Sounds like a good deal.
Sounds like a good deal. They said, the only thing is, if you put a demo on there, we really have to have the game about a month later. Because otherwise people have to
convert those to sales and
Yeah. So I delivered this demo. It was a rubbish demo. There's a real psychology to demos. If it's too long, people don't feel like they need to buy the game.
Right.
If it's got bugs in, they don't buy the game. It's too short. Anyway, it was terrible demo. The game actually didn't come out for 9 more months, which meant that actually Theme Park was not successful in America at all, but in Europe it was fabulous. It was in the top 10 in Europe for 10 years.
wow.
Every year after year, which was bizarre because I did the coding on that and I made a mistake. Anyone who knows about coding, you frame lock the game. So if it's running on a machine that's faster, it doesn't go really fast.
A 486 will run it,
and so it was
386.
Yeah, exactly. It'll run 10 times. And I didn't frame lock it, so it was selling for 10 years. But the bizarre thing, if you brought it, and by that time it was an Intel, God knows what,
Pentium.
You would play it, and by the time the first screen came out, everything was moving incredibly fast because it wasn't frame locked. That's how people played it. I just don't know.
Wow.
But it was fabulously successful in Europe, fabulously successful in Japan, and
it just seems like it doesn't get talked about in the sort of pantheon of great classics.
And then, of course, Roller Coaster Tycoon came out 6 months after Theme Park.
Yeah.
And I think it had more serious graphics, which actually I think people in America like more. I think people in Japan like the kind of cartoony graphics.
Dungeon Keeper.
Yeah.
Was that the beginning of your fascination with empowering the protagonist in your game to actually be evil?
Yeah, well, I can remember the whole ethos behind Dungeon Keeper is that I was getting sick of watching films, especially James Bond films, where the poor bad guy, or no one ever talks about how incredibly hard it must be to be a bad guy. How do the recruitment?
What about his
alone?
feelings?
What about their feelings? And I thought, wouldn't it be just really funny to make a game where you run the dungeon,
Yeah.
where you're the bad guy and all of your minions, they're just bad and evil, and the good guys come in and they're just sickeningly good, and that really that's what happened. And funny enough, the people I work with this this guy called these two people called Simon and Dean Carter.
Again, we referenced them earlier, and we're going to get to them in the.
And it was only after working with them for 6 months that I realised they were the two Carters that did my first conversion, which was a bizarre thing.
Oh, so that was a coincidence?
It was purely a coincidence.
Wow.
They didn't know I'd done it. I didn't know they'd done it.
That's crazy. So why did you leave Bullfrog in the end? You know, you were there, you built this company and then sold it and were successful.
It was really immaturity, if I'm honest.
Yeah?
I'll be honest with you. And you know, it was very confusing time for me, incredibly confusing time. And I don't think I was mature enough to really deal with all the things that was happening.
Meaning the success, or?
It was a success. Success was one thing. Another huge thing was that Electronic Arts had said, right, I want you to grow Bullfrog to be much, much bigger. So over the course of about 6 months, we went from an office of 30 people into about an office of about 300 people.
Wow, that's difficult.
And you've got to remember that the 30, I'm not asking for any sympathy because, you know, there's none's necessary. But when you're working with a team of 30 people, there's a relationship you build up. You know, you eat together, you sleep together, you dream these dreams together, which you can't do with 300 people.
Yeah, I suspect almost an unspoken understanding of, I know what you're going to do, you know what I'm going to do, but if there's 300 people, you have no idea how all the pieces fit.
That's right. So there's that side of it. Then plus, you know, there was this fascinating thing of being a senior vice president of Electronic Arts. And that had a burden to it, which, although fascinating, and I learned an enormous amount from these guys, it did mean I did an awful lot of traveling, I did an awful lot of things which weren't to the core of what I was, which was a designer and a coder. So I think putting all those things together, I kind of felt that that maybe it would be best. I'm going to tell you the real story now.
Please.
This is a terrible story.
That's what the show is for.
It's going to show
the real
me
story.
in such a bad light. So I was thinking about, what should I do? You know, should I say to Electronic Arts, I want to resign as vice president? Should I say that? And I'd invited a friend of mine round, who I've been working with for years and years, called Tim Rance. And he was the technical director, and Tim and I got very drunk. This is the absolute truth. We got very drunk, and Tim said, yeah, you should leave, really. You know, what's the point in staying? You should leave. And I said, yeah, let's write the email. And so I write out this email. Dear Larry, it was Larry Probst. Dear Larry, thank you very much. I'm handing my notes in officially. Thank you, Peter. And to my horror, Tim pressed send.
Oh no.
And of course, I never would have done it. I mean, it was the worst possible way to hand your notice in. It was terrible.
Don't type.
Ask
No
Tim
drunken
Rance
typing.
round when don't type emails. Yeah.
Well, do you call Larry and just explain the
Well,
situation?
it started a whole chain of events off, which were kind of impossible to stop.
Huh.
And it started these, you know, straight away they got very, as you would, and as actually Microsoft did as well, they got very paranoid about me leaving and taking everybody with me and setting
so
up
you
a
put
new
the
studio.
thought in their head with your drunken mistake.
Exactly. It was too late, you know,
Right.
to actually. So they actually said very quickly, they said, right, we don't want you to come into the office anymore, which was terrible for me.
Oh.
It was it was like, you know, it was like ousting me from my family. Don't come, but you completely understand it, Ryan, you know. And don't come into the office anymore. We're going to shut down Dungeon Keeper, and we want you to act out your notice period in what's called garden leave, where you sit and do nothing. And I said, there's no way. Look, I would rather finish Dungeon Keeper under my own steam. So we actually wrote most of Dungeon Keeper at my house.
Wow.
And you know, with Simon and Dean Carter, Mark Healy, who now runs Media Molecule, John T. Barnes, who's a senior producer at Bungie.
Bungie, yeah.
Tony Cox, who's a senior engineer at Microsoft, and me. Yeah, it's the seven of us did it.
So would you take
Someone else
back that email if you could?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was such a silly thing.
Wow.
To do. It was just so unprofessional. You know?
That's a story.
Yeah.
That's
and I don't think I've ever told that story.
I mean,
Exclusive,
honesty's good.
right?
I'll take it. I mean, it's again, this is why I love doing this, because of these kinds of great stories. For more of my IGN Unfiltered interview with Peter Molyneux, be sure to check back every week for a new segment and look for new episodes of Unfiltered every month.